It's time to do the September reading wrap up. Very quickly, I've been incredibly busy with a bunch of different projects for this channel and just work in general, so I haven't done as much reading per se as I would have liked. This is another month that I'm going to include my listening to creepypasta stories while working so that you get a better idea of the kind of stories I've been listening to and the volume of stories I've been listening to. And also, I think that a September reading wrap up, including some extra creepy internet stories, is like a perfect way to roll into Halloween. Starting with our 2-star stories. The Alpha Silent Mate by Eva Bale. So I am continually intrigued by silent mate stories or stories where one of the characters is so traumatized they're not speaking or in some way interacting with everybody else around them. And I am also 100% always super disappointed with them. And I think a core feeling of the silent mate or silent traumatized person genre, many of these authors feel compelled to tell this story in a first-person narrative kind of way. And that means that we as readers are getting all the internal workings of that person even though they're not speaking at all to any of the characters around them and have minimal interaction, which I guess makes sense because it's hard to play off of like a blank slate, but it also doesn't make sense because it leads to a lot of telling instead of showing in these stories, and it also leads to a lot of repetition because we already know what's going on with this silent person. So when they finally come out of their shell and start talking to the other person, they're telling them everything we already know. Like, if you're going to tell me the same thing over and over again, at least have everyone react to it in extremely different ways. So yeah, Eva Bale might have done alright with the Weakest Wolf series I read last month, but she fails entirely when it comes to the whole silent Omega storyline. Next is going to be Camp Blaze by John Affin. So look, this is like a B or C movie written out into a short novella. And the same way I'm not really that taken by a B or C style movie, I wasn't really into this story. I think the general plot is fine in this story. I sort of actually even enjoyed it and thought it was a little bit fun in that regard, but the writing is rough. This book really needed an editor or a second pass to come up to standards as far as I'm concerned. There's a lot of telling the reader instead of showing them when it comes to characterization of our many different staff members. And I kind of understand because it's a large task to encompass, but it's very frustrating to read this dialogue back and forth where we have to stop and have a paragraph that's like, well, Regina wasn't this kind of person, so she assumed the best in everyone. Or, well, Regina is the kind of person who just can't leave anyone behind, so this is what happened next. I don't think Regina is actually one of the character names, FYI, it's just one that popped in my head. And John Athen's writing does have some natural character building work in it. I think if he had left out like these paragraphs explaining and spelling it out why characters were doing certain things and just let the responses speak for themselves, this would be a significantly better story. As it is, there's nothing wrong with it. If you like a Friday the 13th Jason style story, I think you'll be into this one too. But also there are just better extreme horror works out there on the similar subject matter. For example, I'm about a third of the way through Camp Slaughter by Sergio Gomez right now, and I'm loving that. It has excellent prose, the writing style is there, wonderful character development, they're showing instead of telling, there's still creepy and gory elements to it. I just think it's executed significantly better than Camp Blazes, and it also sort of says like this is not just the standard of extreme horror, because these are both extreme horrors and they're both camp extreme horrors. Someone who actually took time and got an editor to complete their work, and someone who it feels like they just churned and burned this and didn't get a lot of feedback. I don't know, maybe one of the authors is significantly more experienced in writing than the other, but overall I just don't think Camp Blaze was for me. Next is Hospital by Han Song. So I didn't finish this story. It's got like this absurdist, surrealist element that intrigued me. And also it's sort of like taking a lot of Buddhist philosophy and information into it and kind of like transforming that in a way that's very appealing to me. But it was just going like a little bit too far. I think the prologue on it is way too long a setup and it is extremely frustrating. And then chapter 1 is also very slow. slow and long to build you into like the core premise of what this story is supposed to be. And it just kept me losing steam repetitively. And also, this is a translated work, so it's very hard for me to judge the original prose. Like, I can't say for certain that this isn't a lost in translation kind of moment. It does have a lot of those hallmarks of like slightly stilted elements that I'm used to seeing in translated writing. Next is I wrote myself a letter and got a reply by Veristash and read by the Dark Somnium. This is a good creepypasta, and it's higher caliber than most of what's here in the 2 stars, but it wasn't quite doing enough within the story for me to rate it higher up. I think part of it is like these different dimensions, crossing over to different dimensions, hell dimensions kind of stories, like don't capture me the way other kinds of creepypastas and scary stories do. There is part of it where the 2 cells are talking to each other and like are being influenced by the different dimensions. It's compelling. And there's also like some good body horror that you can see in this story, really like grotesque and intense moments if you're looking for that. But at the end of the day, I would have a hard time like suggesting someone pick this up and start their creepypasta journey or no sleep creepy stories journey here. What Really Happened in Andersonburg, Pennsylvania by Jessie Clark. The story is excellent. The reason it's sitting here at 2 stars is because I've just read and seen a lot of these and it's not doing anything special. But as far as like its overall composition, the quality of storytelling, what the story is, it's doing all that perfectly. So if you like those like, oh, the town disappeared and we're not quite sure why kind of stories, it's got great pacing, good characterization. It takes a moment for exactly what's going on to click, even though this is the kind of story where it's only like 3 things it could be. And it makes you care about characters that you all know are going to die at the end. I think too, part of why this is sitting at 2 stars for me is the more interesting story is probably this one's sequel. And I won't spoil it, but I'm definitely way more invested in the sequel than I am in this sort of like prequel setup for it, if they do make a sequel with this story. Sitting at 3 stars. Obsession and its sequel Rejection by Kay Lorraine and Meg Ann. So I wasn't even 100% certain I was going to end up reading these books, but I thought it was the kind of fluff that I could read for a few minutes and put down and go back to work on, so that's how this ended up existing. Even though these 2 stories greatly disappointed me and I didn't like them, and I don't think they delivered on their summaries in any kind of satisfying way, that's kind of like par for the course for why I choose multiple supernatural, fake academy, true mate style story. So it's sitting here at 3 stars. It's average, even though it's icky. I mean, maybe icky's not the right word. What I would say is the whole thing is super forgettable. I'm not even mildly curious to find out what happens to any of these characters. Like, I just don't care. Kay Lorraine and Meg Ann are not authors that are going on my never read again list, but they're not authors I'm ever going to seek out either. This was just not a great showing for them. Next is going to be Something Keeps Sending Me Strange Gifts by Christian Willis and read by the Dark Somnium. First of all, this is a category of creepypasta no sleep stories I love. It's like living with the strange. But I just love when we're like immersed in this world where everything is like a little bit off, and the further in, the more unusual and strange it is. And the character just has to exist within it and do the best they can to go forward, like making rules and understanding how everything works and basically trying to coexist with all these creepy, horrific elements. This story specifically is very atmospheric. The character is incredibly compelling. I think the twist in it might bring it to 4 stars, but the twist happens in the last couple minutes of this story. Next is I Think My Wife is Faking Her Amnesia by Brandon Faircloth and read by the Dark Somnium. This is a great story. It goes just a little bit too far and goes on just a little bit too long. It's not a twist, but there is a scene in the back third that was unexpected. Like, I sort of thought the story was going to stop where it was at, and instead it goes into this portion. keeps going past that. And this one portion here is really good and interesting. And I felt like they undermined what was happening in that portion by immediately sort of like discounting it and being like, I did that because I had to kind of moment, instead of I was really questioning things. I don't know, there's a chance for this to get very gothic and intense, and they didn't quite push it that way, and instead they went into like some creepy body horror and like horrific torture kind of things, which is fine. I liked it, but it just had this potential to go a different way that I would have liked more. I was an ambassador for a hostile alien race by The Traveler and read by The Dark Somnium. This is a follow-up to another one of the alien stories that I listened to earlier. I thought that alien story was better than this follow-up was. They have a lot of really interesting science fiction elements. They have some excellent body horror and like unusual situations that can linger with you and be scary for a long time afterwards. For this one, like the guy who's picked to be the alien ambassador obviously has special qualifications and training and all this other stuff that just makes it feel like more removed from something that I might have to deal with, and also makes it feel like big government bullshit, and just makes me feel some other kind of ways about other things that are not scary necessarily. They're just like, oh, life stuff that sucks. Overall, though, alien horror stories usually rank pretty low for me, so being in a 3-star category makes this probably significantly heads and shoulders better than a lot of other stuff you'll find. Next is The Ritual of the Alabaster Angel by Alex Taylor. So this story has an awesome concept and explores some excellent themes and ideas and premises, and I just don't like the execution of it. And I don't mean to say the execution was bad. The execution by Alex Taylor here is really good. It's like a very compact story told in a way that makes sense. All the characters make sense, the plot points, all is good. It's just not to my liking, which is why it's here at 3 stars. I do think with a different character it could have been done more interestingly, but maybe just more interestingly to me, not just generally. And there's nothing wrong with the characters they chose. They're realistic characters, the reactions make sense, just wasn't what I wanted. And that's why it's here at 3 stars. Sitting at 4 stars. Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. So honestly, if this was a standalone book, it would probably be 5 stars. However, I've read quite a few of the Vampire Chronicles in my high school years, and based off of those memories, I'm pretty confident several of these books I'm gonna like more than Interview, which is why I have to leave like some room to place them above it. And another thing is that I read Interview with a Vampire multiple times, so I could script and film my goth thing, and if my current lineup is consistent, you've probably already seen part 1, and after this video you'll probably get part 2. But it took a massive amount of work and rereading and re-listening to this story over and over to write that script, actually film it, and then edit it. So I'm a little bit wore out with everything Lewis related. Not to mention that like my take on Lewis has changed over time. I liked him a lot as a high schooler, and I think I identified with him in high school because Lewis does react like a petulant teenager. You know, there's someone with parental authority over you that you cannot go against, and you're sort of like bound by their whims or their ideas. And in that case, like how Lewis feels is justified and valid. But Lewis is not a petulant teenager. He is an adult ass man. So when he's like complaining about Lestat or his situation or all these other things and just like sitting there and doing nothing, I'm like, get the heck up and change it, Lewis. I just find him significantly more annoying, less insightful and thoughtful, and like a lot more like pompous, arrogant, frustrating. And this book itself, reading it over and over again and revamping the themes and elements, doing it like that, made me sad. It is a sad and depressing book. I think it could be helpful or cathartic depending on where you are in your journey to read it. I think it's highly literary, has a lot of great themes and stuff to explore, excellent for book discussions, but definitely something I would read at your own discretion and know where you are mentally and whether or not you're in the right state to pick it up and read it. But this one, there were days where I was working on it so much and going through so many of these elements back and forth repeatedly and hyperfixating and editing little things that it just did put me in the hole and have me down for the count. I came back from the dead, and now I want to return to hell by Wound Liquor and read by the Dark Somnium. So like a lot of Wound Liquor's works, the like why this is happening or how this is happening is never really addressed. And usually I find this a weakness in their stories and sort of like rate them lower. But in this case, where the character is just discovering this, they're kind of telling us it and processing and emoting all at the same time, I didn't care so much. And on top of that, this story is like definitely a more emotional journey than it is like a scary or creepy journey necessarily. So since I found the characters compelling, since I liked the way they were processing, and I thought like the little box of what they were processing was interesting and detailed and kind of like a fun ride, it's here higher on the list. Come to Live in the Ashes of My Heart by Brandon Faircloth. I like Brandon Faircloth as a writer. I really enjoy a lot of Brandon Faircloth's work that's on the Dark Somnium's channel. This particular story is part of like this connected universe of like ghost tree style stories. And the first one I listened to was like a year ago about another character and their interactions with the ghost tree, and it was excellent. And this one I feel like is not quite as strong as that one, but it's still here at 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. Dark Somnium had Romnex read a lot of this one, and I love her voice. I think she's very emotive when she reads, and I think she brought a ton to this character and this story that also helped make it compelling and interesting. I clean crime scenes and hoarder houses, and today I found something horrifying by Dopabean and read by the Dark Somnium. Generally speaking, I liked this story in its attempt to be surreal and weird and cosmic and different. It went a little bit too far, and I just didn't always know what was going on. I think if I had been just listening or reading to this story instead of like listening while I worked, it's probably be closer to like a 3-star read. But because I was listening and working at the same time, and it was giving me constant imagery and concepts that were unique and good, I just was like, all right, let's go with it and do this thing. This is a story that's like an experience, and I don't think the ending to it necessarily matters, or that like all the parts don't 100% gel and make sense. Sitting at 5 stars. Sometimes It's Better to Leave the Survivors Behind by Hayden Dalby. This is kind of an unusual one for me to be sitting at 5 stars because it's significantly more action oriented than it is like horror, creepy, or long lingering moments. I think the sound design that Dark Somnium did here helped me a lot, and I think the fact that I was listening to this back and forth in the car also played a role in why it's rated so high. If you like body horror, you'll probably be into this story. And if you like war crimes or like evil governments or secret scientist experiments that are just awful, again, this one's probably for you. It goes a little bit off the rails, especially at the end with the monsters, but I was willing to go with it. It had created an environment and tension that I was really looking to get some kind of resolution from. And because the music is so good in it, I think it's one I'd probably listen to again, even though the story itself is probably not something I'd ever pick up and read. Next is My Childhood Monster is Trapped in the Basement by Veritas, and read by the Dark Somnium. I loved this story. I was immediately engaged and in love with it from the first line, and it just kept getting better and better. It's extremely emotional. It has like this overall fear of uncertainty and unknown just like hovering over the edge. There's quite a few different ways this story could have gone, so it kept me like heavily engaged in trying to figure out exactly which way it would go. I don't know, this story just kind of made me really happy, and I would recommend it to pretty much anyone if you're into that kind of living with the strange, creepy surrealism, using a horror story to kind of explore some other elements or feelings that a person might have in their life. Next is Pen Pal by Dathan Avervach and read by the Dark Somnium. I'd listened to this one years ago and liked it a lot then. This particular creepypasta is a pretty classic one. It's one of the few ones that I would have been compelled to read instead of just one that I'd listen to and enjoy. Because I've listened to two different audio versions of it now, I can say like the writing itself is super solid and compelling. The story all on its own gives me so many chills and leaves me with all these lingering questions and doubts. It's not a supernatural horror. It is definitely a very grounded kind of premise, although it takes it to an extreme that might be a little above and beyond. I love the way it plays with like these recovered memories, different conversations that remind me of these other elements, and now that I'm looking at it as an adult, I'm seeing it all might be connected kind of thing. It's very similar in a lot of ways to My Dad Finally Told Me What Happened That Day by Jared Roberts. But Pen Pal gives you a satisfying ending. It gives you a much cleaner narrative thoroughfare. And I think exactly what we're scared of and why we're scared of it becomes significantly clearer and feels way more real to life. That doesn't make one better than the other, but if you were trying to figure out which of those two stories you wanted to go for, that would be some of the key differences. But I think if you like one, you probably like the other. I received a strange package that I didn't order by Brandon Faircloth and read by the Dark Somnium. This again is part of the Ghost Tree story, and it is a lot closer to 4 stars than 5, all the way until the end. And I just found the ending so gut-wrenching. Brought me over the edge up to 5 stars. The way this one connects to a couple of the other Ghost Tree stories also helps elevate it for me. I'm being vague intentionally here because all of the connections in the Ghost Tree story are kind of spoilers for other elements of the story. Even though there is this part like in the back third in the middle that's too much and is really confusing and I didn't like it all. When we hit this ending, it was just the gut punch that I really needed to bring this into a 5-star story. And last is The Ghost Tree by Brandon Faircloth. And that's where we kind of tie up all these other stories, 2 of which I listened to this month, into a big bow grand finale kind of thing. And I loved it. I loved all the different narrations. I loved the different little pieces coming together. It was very satisfying to get an end resolution on all these characters that I just sort of got like fade to black on their story until now. Overall, I just think the execution on this was amazing, and it shows a lot of talent and thought in the writers. And that's going to be everything I read or listened to in the past September. Mostly listening that month because I've been burning the midnight oil and completing my Interview with a Vampire stuff. I still have to script part 4, guys, and it's like September 27th right now. I'm very anxious about whether or not I'm gonna be completing this project and putting it out in a timely manner, but I guess you guys will sort of kind of know about some of that by now. I feel like I read and listened to a bunch of great books this past month. I hope you guys did too. Tell me in those comments down below what your favorite read of September was or your least favorite read. And as always, keep reading. Bye!